Hey everyone, Jeff from Lewis Physical Therapy and Sports Rehab here. I want to go over today some general pitching mechanics or throwing mechanics that we look at during the rehab process. Now, first and foremost, I am not a pitching coach. I do not claim to be a pitching coach. The stuff I'm going to go over here is more from the context of just arm health or being conscious of the arm or come back from an arm injury especially versus the performance side of things. And those do go hand in hand together sometimes, but this is more from the standpoint of like right before they start throwing and when they start throwing, how we are going about kind of identifying and looking for certain things. And this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of it, but I think this just breaks things down to three key areas that we look at from throwing itself more than anything. I'll probably do a video at a later point in time that goes together like kind of an all-in-one encompassing of a lot of the kind of drill work that I will do with guys. But you could certainly just go on my channel and just type in like pitching drill, and it'll pull up a lot of different stuff more than anything. So if in the meantime you want to look at that, you certainly can. But I'll do probably a more comprehensive video at some point in time on that. But kind of going into this here more than anything, what I really want to think about too is when a guy first starts throwing right away, things are, especially after like a surgery and whatnot, things aren't going to look perfect right away. And our job more than anything as clinicians is give them certain drills that can just start building the right patterns more than anything. Again, it's not going to be perfect right out of the way, right out of the gate, but we want to take time to start building those patterns. There have been times, and honestly in cases for some guys early in my career, I did this and I've started doing a lot more, guys right out of elbow or shoulder surgery, the first week or two of their throwing program, it might be just drill work, pivot picks, roll-ins, things like that. And I truly believe for a lot of guys, that is going to be a better option for them at the beginning versus just saying, hey, go start throwing, and now we're incorporating bad patterns. Because in the grand scheme of things, 2 extra weeks at the beginning of a progression just to hammer drill work to make sure you get a really solid on-ramp when they do start their traditional throwing is going to be, in my opinion, put them in a better position for long-term success more than anything. So the 2 biggest things we want to look at from a rehab throwing and just when you're kind of looking at old videos of the individual or the pitcher itself to kind of see what their mechanics look like are look at where they're at from leg lift and then their, I should say, stride and foot contact here. Those 2 phases together, that's going to give you a lot of information in these cases because a lot of times the any issues we see later on in the throwing movement usually have root causes or issues back to this kind of these phases here. It really comes back down to you start wrong, you end wrong. Not always, but that's a good rule of thumb to follow more than anything. So going back up to this, and this is again just from a lot of my personal experience from working with a lot of guys, seeing different trends and whatnot. But backside mechanics are a big thing more than anything. We know that we know you have to use your lower body to throw. If you do not use your lower body to throw, it is going to end up being more stress elsewhere, and that is usually the shoulder and the elbow. So we're trying to get that kind of taken care of right out of the way. And this is a conversation I like to have with guys that, they've, by the time a lot of guys see me, let's just say a lot of like juniors, seniors in high schools, or even past that, they've likely already undergone or gone through a lot of just pitching work, pitching coaches and whatnot, which is very valuable in Sam because there's a lot of good work that comes from that. And I kind of asked them, hey, what are the things you've been working on with your coaches, and specifically on the backside side of things? And the biggest thing I kind of listen for with guys is, they're like, yeah, they were kind of working on me getting used to driving down the mound versus falling down the mound. So the biggest way that I kind of break that from a general standpoint is falling down the mound is really you are essentially just kind of drifting and falling down. So that backside knee is essentially collapsing early versus holding for a long period of time. And as a result, you get early trunk rotation, arm stays behind you, and just kind of leads to a slew of other things more than anything. Versus what we want is guys driving down the mound. We want guys to be able to use their hip and their lower body to drive down the ground more than anything. And there's a lot of other things that go into that. But then that kind of ties us into, okay, what is our hip exam telling us? Let's look at their range of motion. Are they an external versus an internal rotation bias? And there's a lot of other stuff on that. But the kind of simplest thing is, guys that are internal rotation biases mean they have a lot of hip internal rotation naturally in their hip exam to go through. They're going to have a lot more of that bigger coil movement where they're going back like this, because that big coil movement is a lot of relative internal rotation of pelvis on femur going into the backside. Versus guys that don't have a lot of internal but have a lot more external, they're going to be a lot more of those kind of guys that are just a little more upright here and kind of sitting into their back hip and driving down. Now, both of them, they still have to be able to effectively use their back hip. Like what we don't want is a guy that can just coil and just use all spine to a degree from that coil rotation to go through and uncoil and create their energy there. We still need to be able to have them get into their back hip. So that's kind of one important thing to be mindful of. And that brings us into our next question of glute patterning more than anything. So really it just comes down to is how effectively can they use and isolate their, not only their glute max, but their glute med, their lateral glute stabilizers as well. And the reason being is because that is going to be one of our main propulsion mechanisms as they're going down the mount in that lateral direction. So a perfect example is if you have a guy do just a single leg glute bridge or just a single leg glute test on their stomach and you have them hold that position there, it comes down to a simple answer of where are they feeling it? It's going to be one of three areas. They feel it in their low back, their glute, or their hamstring. And historically, guys that do not use their glute patterning well, it's going to be either their low back or their hamstring. And again, that's just giving us some more insight in terms of, and information in terms of how are they moving throughout their hip and how are we going to target that either from a pre-throw standpoint, from a more rehab standpoint, just kind of things like that. So again, the backside mechanics are a massive implication. And again, I want to talk about this because it is very easy. I've been guilty of this in the past too. You have a guy come in from an arm injury, you focus just on the arm. And you have to. You absolutely have to. You cannot just say it's an arm injury. Well, we're going to spend all of our time down working on this side. This stuff is important, and it's one of those things where it's like you have just a couple things in the program that emphasize it versus having a ton of different stuff. The majority of your volume needs to come from, and especially like in the clinic, is going to be coming from their arm work more than anything. Make sure they can support it more than anything. So again, be mindful of that. The easiest way I kind of mix that in early on in rehab is, I program for guys for their lifting as well during rehab. I just kind of include a lot of this stuff in their pre-lift prep more than anything. Because again, we want to get their glute work, get their glute pattern, and get more awareness into using their glute. And then they're going to do some lower body work. So you just kind of, now you're adding load on top of it and driving more awareness and strength into that glute complex more than anything. So that's kind of a just overview on the backside side of mechanics. Now, front side is important, no doubt about that. Guys need to be able to get onto their, properly brace over their front side. I don't have that in there because yes, it is important. I think most guys, this is where things become a problem more often than not for them. So now going on to trunk mechanics. So the trunk, core, abdominal region, whatever you want to call it, you want to look at that as that's your area of transfer more than anything. So yes, you will use your core to a degree to generate some force, but I honestly look at the core and trunk as your main stabilizer and that bridge, that link between your lower half and your upper half. So what we want to think about is your lower body is what produces the majority of your force. Your core needs to be able to maintain a relatively stiff, not necessarily rigid, but a stiff position to then transfer that force up to the arm. So that's what we want to look at here. So from a trunk mechanic standpoint, what we want to look at in terms of their trunk tilt and glove angle to a degree is if you have a guy that as they get their leg lift, are they leaning back a lot? Are they collapsed forward too much? Or are they having a tilt this way? And if a guy has a tilt towards their backside, is that a byproduct of them not being able to use their glute well to stabilize when they get into that leg lift position? So it's all goes together more than anything. The other side of glove angle is when a guy is going in to their kind of stride. Again, are they having a tilt? Back, I'll show you this way here. Are they tilting this way? And as a result, their glove is up here now. So you want to be mindful of that too, where if they have a guy that is, their glove is way high up here like that, it's just giving you more insight and information into this. And then your hip-shoulder separation at foot contact especially is a big piece of that. Again, you want to think of this as like a slingshot to a degree. So you're having that maximal hip pelvis is in a closed position. You're getting a good amount of separation essentially from trunk rotation with your arm up in that position. So also the best way to think about it is if you're a right-handed thrower, you are able to have your essentially belt buckle closed forward while your trunk is in that maximal rotated back position, and then essentially builds a massive amount of energy that you then, again, like a slingshot, you then release as part of your pitch. So again, hip-shoulder separation is a big piece of that there. So again, an easier way to look at that again is if you're in your closed position, belt buckles forward, your chest, if you're a right-handed pitcher, your chest is still essentially facing towards like third base relatively. You can look that up. There's good pictures of that there. But again, that can be a little bit of, that's a couple things. Is that a hip mobility issue if they can't get there? Is it a thoracic spine issue? Is it truly a trunk like strength issue? Do they start losing and get fatigued as they go throughout their outing? So just all things to be thinking of more than anything. And then the last piece here, because we have to talk about, is your arm and your shoulder position. So this is where a lot of our drill work from an arm standpoint early on comes into play. So some couple things. A lot of horizontal abduction. So that is the guy that when they are throwing, their arm is way behind their body like this here. And that leads to a slew of things where if they get a ton of arm behind their body here, are they going to be late now? And now it's going to be a lot of stress on that anterior shoulder, or are they someone with a posterior labral issue, internal impingement, and now you're getting a lot of closing on that back of that joint space on the posterior labrum? Are you getting a lot more flaring out here? So it's kind of just things that we're looking at that. Historically, what I found in this case, the guys that have this are those really tall, long lever elastic guys. And they always think of, oh yeah, I'm using my scap, I get back, I'm using my scap. And really, at the end of the day, you go and put them in these positions to use their scap, and they're not using it as all. So actually, I've got a shoulder model here. The best way to look at that is, here is scap, shoulder. They are like this. Their arm is way behind their body versus, so they're here and their shoulder blade is kind of in this kind of more forward position here versus all of it moving together back like this. So that's kind of the difference there. So we want to be mindful of that for sure. And there's a lot that goes into that, but that's one thing we're on the lookout for. And then elbow flexion, especially from a elbow rehab standpoint, I want to make sure that their elbow is at least at 90 degrees when their front foot is down. If they start to be like out here, it just leads to a little bit, again, this movement here, which we don't want, just to get a little bit too much excess valgus stress on that elbow. So that's another piece there. And then the other piece over here is, again, guys that have that really long arm and they just don't flip up in time. So another example is the guy that, they come down here, they lead with their elbow up like this, and their front foot is down, and they've either barely started their rotation or they're still at neutral. Like they haven't even started. Like ideally, when that front foot gets down, I want to see guys a little bit, like at least 45 degrees, halfway of that rotation up. I don't necessarily need them up here. They want to be starting their rotation. So as they're coming through, now they're getting that kind of natural movement into layback. So that's another thing just to be mindful of there. Guys that lead with the elbow and just don't, their rotation is late. Their front foot is down and their arm is all down here, and then it goes to their shoulder, their elbow, and it throws a lot of things off. So again, this is a very general overview on a lot of the common mechanical stuff, not all encompassing, but the common mechanical stuff we will work on, guys, early in the rehab process, and then continue to work on with them throughout the throughout the rehab throwing program. And again, don't be afraid to just do drill work for a week or two. I truly believe most guys will be better off, especially your tall, long-arm guys. And I've talked about that a lot on our channel recently because I see a lot of those guys, and they just have different demands than other guys more than anything. Don't be afraid to just do drill work for 2 weeks. I've had plenty of guys where I've done that, and they literally go from not knowing where their arm is in space to literally being like, okay, I know where my arm is finally. Again, they have a lot longer levers to control, meaning more stability and more just kind of, proprioceptive input needs to get into that shoulder more than anything. So again, I'm not a pitching coach from this standpoint. This is just from a rehab context more than anything of things we want to be mindful of to take stress off the arm throughout that process. And this is not just a matter of do 1 or 2 sessions, it's fixed. You have to do this weeks after weeks, months after months. Like this is a constant thing that needs to be drilled in from that standpoint. And really, we're keeping a very close eye on it throughout more than anything. And then, especially when we get to bullpens, working with the pitching coaches to see, okay, what are they seeing? What is their pitching coach eye seeing? And then we kind of find a way to blend the two together more than anything, because we do get to a point, we have to in rehab, where we shift more to the performance side of things. So again, this is some general information. If you have questions on this, leave them below in the comment section or subscribe to our channel for more content like this.